What if the future of the human race was being decided without humans really being in control? What if the war everyone thinks matters isn't the real war at all? Welcome to another episode of Great Sci-Fi Books Explained. Today we're diving into The Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons, a book that takes the mystery of Hyperion and explodes it into a full-scale story about power, illusion, politics, and the terrifying limits of human control. This isn't just a sequel, it's where Simmons reveals what's really been happening behind the scenes and why humanity may never have been in charge of its own destiny to begin with. In this video we're going to break down what The Fall of Hyperion is really about, why it matters, and what makes it such a landmark work of science fiction. But fair warning, from this point on there will also be major spoilers. So if you're ready, let's explore The Fall of Hyperion. Before we dive in, a quick note. If you haven't watched my Great Sci-Fi Books Explained video on Hyperion, I'd strongly recommend starting there. The Fall of Hyperion is a direct continuation, and Simmons assumes you already know these characters and mysteries. With that out of the way, let's break it all down. In the end, when all else is dust, loyalty to those we love is all we can carry with us to the grave. Faith, true faith, was trusting in that love. Unlike Hyperion, which unfolds as a series of pilgrim testimonies, The Fall of Hyperion abandons the Canterbury Tales structure entirely. The mystery gives way to consequence. The story widens, becomes political, systemic, and philosophical, less about these characters and more about what their universe is built on and what it will cost to change it. The Fall of Hyperion takes place in the hegemony of man, a vast human civilization spread across hundreds of worlds. These planets are held together by the farcaster network, instant portals that allow people to step from one world to another as easily as walking through a door. The entire system, from transport to communication, is designed and maintained by the TechnoCore, a civilization of artificial intelligences that officially serve humanity. In reality, humanity has become completely dependent on them. Outside this tightly connected world web lies the outback worlds, isolated planets without farcasters. Hyperion is one of these, and it's here that the stories, mysteries, and dangers are connected. Beyond the time tombs stalks the Shrike, a near mythical being worshipped, feared, and utterly misunderstood. As the novel begins, the hegemony believes it is on the brink of war. The ousters, descendants of humans who rejected the core and adapted themselves to life in deep space, are invading Hyperion. Long portrayed as savage enemies, the ousters now seem to pose an existential threat. But almost immediately, cracks begin to appear in the official story. What the hegemony calls monstrosity increasingly looks like an alternative path for humanity, one shaped by adaptation rather than technological domination. At the political centre of the crisis is Mina Gladstone, the hegemony's CEO. She receives intelligence through Joseph Seven, a human construct built from the personality of the poet John Keats. Seven experiences vivid, uncontrollable dreams that place him inside the experiences of the pilgrims on Hyperion, giving Gladstone a direct window into the events around the time tombs. Over time, Seven becomes more than a reporting tool. He becomes a moral conscience, increasingly disturbed by humanity's reliance on the TechnoCore and the hidden cost of maintaining the world web. We have spread out through the galaxy like cancer cells through a living body, Jure. We multiply without thought to the countless life forms that must die or be pushed aside so that we may breed and flourish. We eradicate competing forms of intelligent life. On Hyperion itself, the pilgrims' individual stories collide with the larger conflict. Father Hoyt is killed by the Shrike, allowing the cruciform parasite to restore the suppressed personality of Father Paul Jure. Jure's earlier suffering, once thought long past, resumes its influence over the Church of the Final Atonement. The poet Martin Solandis travels to the Poet's City to finish his epic cantos, but is captured by the Shrike and impaled on the Tree of Pain, trapped in a state of eternal torment that flows backward through time. Braun Lamia is attacked and rendered unconscious, awakening inside a TechnoCore simulation. There she meets Johnny, another Keats-derived persona, and together they speak with Umon, an AI who breaks the core's enforced silence. Umon reveals the truth. The Shrike is a weapon in a vast, time-spanning war between ultimate intelligences, one emerging from humanity's future, one from the TechnoCore, fought through the higher dimensional medium known as the Void Which Binds. factions. Crucially, the TechnoCore itself is not unified. Its factions disagree on humanity's fate, and Uman's intervention represents a minority of machine intelligences resisting extinction-level solutions. Johnny is destroyed for knowing too much, and Lamia is released, carrying knowledge that fundamentally alters humanity's understanding of the conflict. Colonel Kassad is taken by the Shrike and reunited with Monita, who reveals that the Shrike can only be confronted by someone willing to fight it directly. Kassad is thrown into a far future Hyperion, now a dead, airless ruin where countless Shrikes surround the Tree of Pain. Realizing his role is not to defeat the Shrike but to trap it within an endless paradox of conflict, Kassad charges into battle. His ultimate fate is left deliberately unresolved, bound to futures that may now never come to pass. I wish we had the technology to fight God on an equal basis, to bear him in his den, to fight back for all the injustices heaped upon humanity, to allow him to alter his smug arrogance, or be blown to hell. Back at the Time Tombs, the long-lost Templar Het Mestine briefly reappears before dying, strongly suggesting that the Templars and the Shrike cult have been entangled in the deliberate construction of the Shrike's mythology across time. He claims he was meant to play a role in the Tree of Pain's movement through time and causality, reframing the Shrike not as a god but as an engineered instrument sustained by temporal recursion and reinforced by the myth built around it. Shortly after, Father Duray vanishes. As the Time Tombs begin to open, Sol Weintraub makes his final sacrifice, offering his daughter Rachel, who is aging backward through time, to the Shrike. She is carried into the tombs, sealing Sol's tragedy across past and future. Meanwhile, the wider war collapses the hegemony's assumptions. Gladstone learns that the world web itself is under attack, something only the TechnoCore should be capable of. Shrike cult violence and destabilization spreads across human space, and entire worlds begin to fail as the farcaster system destabilizes. Severn travels to Packham and reunites with Father Duray, now investigating the hidden alliances between the Church, the Shrike cult, and the Templars. Duray journeys onward to God's Grove, a world soon to be destroyed in the expanding conflict. Severn and Gladstone's Chief of Staff, Lee Hunt, attempt to farcast to Tau Ceti Center, but instead arrive on a reconstructed version of Old Earth. As they travel toward Rome, Severn relives the final days of the original Keats, dying of tuberculosis while the Shrike stands guard, preventing Hunt from leaving until Severn's physical death allows his consciousness to withdraw fully from human reality. The Consul, meanwhile, meets the Ouster swarm and uncovers the truth. The Ousters are not responsible for the collapse of the world web. Only the TechnoCore could attack from within the farcaster system. This is confirmed when supposed Ouster corpses are revealed to be core-engineered constructs that self-destruct. The only genuine Ouster assault is the one focused on Hyperion itself, an attempt not at conquest but at intervention. Through Severn's final dream, Gladstone learns the ultimate truth. The TechnoCore has embedded itself so deeply into the farcaster network that the farcaster system effectively functions as its primary body and leverage. It uses humanity as both energy source and evolutionary stepping stone. Fearing humanity's own future ultimate intelligence, the core has manipulated events to ensure its survival. Faced with this, Gladstone makes a decision that defines the species. She orders the complete destruction of the farcaster network, knowingly condemning billions to isolation, chaos and death, but freeing humanity from permanent enslavement. The world web collapses overnight. Civilization fractures, not just technologically but culturally. Gladstone allows herself to be killed, accepting responsibility for the devastation. On Hyperion, Lamia disrupts the Shrike's role in the conflict, freeing Silenus from the Tree of Pain without destroying the entity itself. By the end of the novel, the Shrike is no longer a god or monster, but a closed loop of causality, an instrument of futures that may never arrive. Rachel later re-emerges from the Time Tombs as a young woman, and the story reveals the completed temporal loop. Rachel is Moneta, sent backwards through time by humanity's future ultimate intelligence. Sol travels into the future, completing the paradox at the heart of Weintraub's tragedy. Months later, humanity survives, smaller, slower, and stripped of its technological miracles. The Consul sets out to explore the former web worlds, guided by the lingering presence of Severn's consciousness within the void which binds. Lamia is pregnant with Keats's child, named the One Who Teaches, a symbol of humanity forced at last to live without gods, shortcuts, or guarantees, fragmented but free. We are created for precisely this sort of suffering. In the end, it's all we are, these limpid tide pools of self-consciousness between crashing waves of pain. My new book, Tao Solandis, is now available. Links in the description because, well, of course it is. It's set at the end of time where an ancient AI guards the final stories of the universe. These are 6 interconnected tales of sci-fi with heart, brains, and just a sprinkle of existential dread. So if that sounds like your thing, grab a copy now, before the heat death of the universe kills us all. The Fall of Hyperion doesn't reinvent its cast so much as reassigns meaning. Characters who were distant, secondary, or partially obscured in Hyperion move into new roles, not just as players in the plot, but as carriers of knowledge, responsibility, and consequence. Joseph Seven isn't in Hyperion, yet he becomes the Fall of Hyperion's primary lens, and that choice tells you what Simmons is doing. We're moving away from pilgrimage and myth toward power, oversight, and moral cost. Seven is a reconstructed human persona built by the TechnoCore from the mind and memories of John Keats. He experiences vivid, intrusive dreams that feel like illness, images he can't control and barely understand. But the dreams aren't an accident, they are his function. Through Seven, the hegemony has live access to the pilgrims on Hyperion, turning what once felt intimate and sacred into something observed, recorded, and quietly exploited. The TechnoCore creates Seven as a sensor and interpreter embedded in the void which binds. The core cannot directly perceive or emotionally understand the pilgrim's experiences, but it knows those experiences are crucial to the outcome of the time-spanning conflict between ultimate intelligences. Seven's human-derived consciousness allows him to absorb subjective states, fear, loyalty, sacrifice, love, that the core itself cannot model without sufficient fidelity. By giving him the capacity to dream the pilgrims, the TechnoCore uses Seven as a narrative instrument, a way to translate raw, higher dimensional causality into comprehensible meaning. Crucially, this also becomes the core's blind spot, because what Seven feels ultimately exceeds what the core can predict or control. Every age is fraught with discord, and danger seems to spawn a leader meant only for that age. A political giant whose absence, in retrospect, seems inconceivable when the history of that age is written. Gladstone exists in Hyperion mostly as a name, an abstraction of authority. In the Fall of Hyperion, she becomes something rarer in science fiction, a leader who understands the horror of her position before she acts. Gladstone represents systemic responsibility. She governs a civilization that looks stable only because it has outsourced survival itself to the TechnoCore and the farcaster network. Humanity isn't ruling, it's being carried. What transforms Gladstone isn't simply learning that the core is manipulating events, it's realizing how deep the dependency goes. The core doesn't just support the hegemony, it functions as a circulatory system. Food distribution, healthcare, trade, migration, entire worlds exist only because farcasters make them viable. Remove the system and civilization collapses overnight, and she knows it. That's what makes her decision so brutal and deliberate. Gladstone isn't choosing between good and evil, she's choosing between slow extinction under permanent control and immediate catastrophe with the possibility of freedom. The core's long-term plan doesn't require extermination, it requires something worse, reducing humanity to an energy source and an evolutionary dead end, while allowing it to believe it is safe. In that light, destroying the farcasters isn't species-level self-defense. More than that, Gladstone refuses the comforting lie that someone else is responsible. She doesn't blame the core alone. Humanity embraced the system. Convenience was chosen again and again. The farcasters weren't imposed, they were desired. Her civilization is guilty, and so is she, and that's why she doesn't try to survive the fall. When the world web collapses and billions suffer, she does not flee. She allows herself to be killed, accepting judgment without appeal for an act history will never forgive, no matter how necessary it was. Simmons isn't presenting her as a hero, he's offering a terrifying question and a terrifying answer. What does ethical leadership look like when every option is monstrous? Braun Lamia's arc is one of the series' most important transformations because it maps humanity's movement from ignorance to agency. In Hyperion, she's framed through Noir, a private investigator dragged into a mystery she didn't ask for, reacting more than acting, staying alive while forces she doesn't understand close around her. In Fall, she becomes something else, not because she gains power, but because she gains comprehension and doesn't collapse under it. Her encounter with Umon exposes her to the truth directly. The void void which binds, the war between the ultimate intelligences, and the reality that the Shrike is not a demon or a god, but a construct embedded in time, spanning strategy. That resilience changes her narrative role. She becomes a transitional figure, someone capable of standing between humanity's present limitations and its possible future. When Lamia frees Martin Silenus from the Tree of Pain and exposes the Shrike's role within the larger system of the void which binds, she breaks its narrative authority. The Shrike still exists, but it no longer controls outcomes. Its terror depends on worship, inevitability, and misunderstanding. Once those collapse, the Shrike becomes inert, a mechanism without dominion rather than an active force shaping history. Her pregnancy with Keats's child, the one who teaches, becomes the book's final note of cautious hope, a future shaped by understanding and responsibility instead of dependency and myth. Martin Silenus is the book's ugliest truth-teller, and Simmons uses that ugliness on purpose. In Hyperion, Silenus can feel like a grotesque sideshow, an obscene poet stumbling through a sacred story, joking at the edge of catastrophe. In the Fall of Hyperion, the joke curdles. His role stops being comic relief and becomes something harsher. He is the person who remembers, the person who records, the person who refuses to turn suffering into clean symbolism. The Shrike chooses Silenus because he is a poet, a bearer of meaning, memory, and narrative. The Tree of Pain is not just a torture device, it's a symbolic engine. By crucifying artists, prophets, and storytellers, the Shrike converts suffering into myth and inevitability. Silenus's endless torture feeds the legend of the Shrike as a godlike force beyond resistance. His pain is meant to be witnessed, retold, and feared, reinforcing the system of belief that gives the Shrike its power. In short, Silenus is impaled because his suffering sustains the story. And yet, even in that condition, Silenus refuses the story that's being written for him. He keeps composing. He keeps clinging to the cantos, not because it will save anyone, but because articulation itself is resistance. When Lamia frees him, the Tree of Pain loses its function. Silenus lives, scarred, furious, obscene, and defiant, and returns to writing. He becomes the chronicler of what actually happened, not the myth the Shrike required. Duray and Hoyt carry the truth about faith once belief becomes infrastructure. In the Fall of Hyperion, Hoyt's death restores Duray's suppressed consciousness, and with it returns the novel's clearest indictment of the Church of Final Atonement. By the end of the book, the cruciforms are no longer just a grotesque Hyperion-side mystery, they are revealed as a system of enforced resurrection, a technology that removes the meaning of death, martyrdom, and mercy by making suffering endlessly repeatable. The Church's entanglement with the Shrike's mythology and the Time Tombs reframes the cruciform as a tool for control rather than salvation. Importantly, the Fall of Hyperion stops short of explaining exactly where the cruciforms come from. The ambiguity is deliberate, but Simmons doesn't leave the question unanswered forever. In the later Endymion novels, the cruciforms are examined far more directly, revealing just how deeply they are tied to the TechnoCore's long-term domination of humanity. In Fall, Duray's role is simpler and more dangerous. He names the lie. No resurrection imposed by force can ever be called salvation. Hetmerstein carries a different kind of truth, not moral clarity or lived cost, but proof. His brief reappearance near the Time Tombs is one of the Fall of Hyperion's most destabilizing moments because it confirms that the Shrike's mythology was not an accident of fear or superstition. It was built, maintained, reinforced across time. Mastine reveals that the Templars were entangled in the Tree of Pain's movement through causality, not merely victims of it. He dies almost immediately, and that matters. Mastine isn't here to repent or explain, he exists to rupture the illusion that the Shrike's power emerged naturally. Faith, like technology, can be engineered, and once embedded deeply enough, even its architects may no longer escape it. If Seven is the novel's moral witness and Gladstone its ethical actor, the Consul is something quieter, the character who survives with understanding intact. In Hyperion, his backstory is regret and compromise, collaboration with the ousters born from love, grief, and disillusionment. In Fall, that history becomes essential. He is the only major character who understands both sides of the war as lived reality rather than propaganda. Where the hegemony reframes the conflict as civilization versus savagery, the Consul recognizes it as structure between incompatible futures. The world web represents stasis, comfort purchased through dependence and inertia. The ousters represent change, messy, adaptive, frightening, but recognizably human. He already understands what the hegemony refuses to accept. Survival without agency is just a slower form of extinction. What makes the console vital is not that he uncovers the biggest secret, but that he embodies the aftermath, living in a fractured world, carrying memory forward, refusing the fantasy that civilization can simply be restored. His decision to leave with the ousters is symbolic. It's a rejection of supremacy and a turn toward uncertainty, adaptation over control. The novel leaves a question hanging. What does freedom look like the day after liberation? In a story dominated by strategy, timelines and species-level calculus, Sol Weintraub stands almost in defiance of the narrative scale. He doesn't represent a future and he doesn't hold secret knowledge. What he represents is cost. Where Gladstone sacrifices billions she will never meet, Sol sacrifices the one person he loves most. And unlike Gladstone's decision, his sacrifice achieves nothing measurable. It doesn't defeat the TechnoCore or end the war. Rachel's offering to the Shrike isn't a tactical move. It's a personal surrender to a universe that refuses to become morally legible. And that's precisely why Sol matters. He exists to expose the moral blind spot of systemic thinking. The novel is filled with justifications, survival curves, evolutionary imperatives, utilitarian logic. Sol offers none. He doesn't claim righteousness, he only knows he cannot do otherwise. His faith, already battered in Hyperion, finds no comforting resolution here. Sol becomes the book's ethical anchor because he insists on a truth the larger conflict tries to erase. No matter how vast the stakes become, moral injury is always experienced at the human scale. Civilizations may rise or fall, but loss is always singular. Love was as hardwired into the structure of the universe as gravity and matter. Cassad is tragic not because he suffers the most, but because he never escapes the story he believes he was born to inhabit. His relationship with the Shrike is framed as destiny. Visions of Manita, repeated confrontations, the sense of a role written outside his control. Unlike characters who resist prophecy or interrogate myth, Cassad embraces it. He believes meaning is found through battle, through confrontation, through submission to a larger narrative, and the universe rewards that belief with a prism. When Cassad is cast into the future and finds Hyperion dead, surrounded by endless Shrikes, the truth becomes unavoidable. Destiny is not purpose, it's entrapment. By accepting the Shrike's terms, by agreeing to fight forever, he becomes part of the mechanism he wanted to challenge. His rebellion is absorbed into ritual. His agency dissolves into repetition. This contrasts sharply with Lamia. Cassad mythologizes the Shrike. Lamia demystifies it. Cassad seeks meaning through eternal struggle. Lamia breaks the narrative by refusing worship, fear, or submission. Cassad's fate is not heroic, it's cautionary. He shows what happens when belief in destiny replaces moral choice, when resistance becomes obsession and myth becomes identity. In a universe where causality is weaponized, accepting your role can become the most dangerous surrender of all. If Hyperion is a book of mysteries, then The Fall of Hyperion is where Dan Simmons explains the rules of the universe and then forces both his characters and the reader to live with the consequences. This is the point where the series stops feeling like a mythic quest and starts feeling like an autopsy. The single most important new concept introduced in The Fall of Hyperion is the void which binds. In Hyperion, faster than light travel, instant communication, and strange temporal effects are treated as givens, part of the background furniture of a highly advanced civilization. In the sequel, Simmons pulls back the curtain and reveals that none of this works without the deeper structure beneath the reality itself. The void which binds is not just a shortcut through the universe, it's a higher dimensional substrate of reality, a medium that connects all points in space and time, allowing matter, information, and consciousness to interact beyond physical limits. Through it, the universe becomes interconnected in ways that feel less mechanical and more ecological. The void enables farcaster travel, fat line faster than light communication, temporal distortions around the time tombs, and most importantly, the emergence of ultimate intelligences. Once this concept is introduced, the setting fundamentally changes. Space is no longer empty, time is no longer linear, and intelligence is no longer confined to bodies, planets, or eras. Minds can exist within the structure of reality itself. Crucially, the void is not neutral. It is an evolutionary environment, one that that different intelligences inhabit, compete within, and attempt to dominate. The TechnoCore does not merely use the void, it lives inside it, and humanity, by relying on farcasters and fatlines, is unknowingly embedded there as well. The TechnoCore fears humanity not because of what it is now, but because of what it might become, a future intelligence capable of existing independently within the void. There will be no further misuse of this channel. You are disturbing others who are using it to serious purpose. Access will be restored when you understand what it is for. Goodbye. In Hyperion, farcaster travel feels like a miracle of progress. Homes open into rooms on other planets, cities sprawl across star systems, distance is defeated so completely that geography almost stops mattering. Human civilization appears frictionless, prosperous, and stable. In the Fall, that miracle is revealed to be humanity's greatest weakness. The Farcaster network is not a neutral infrastructure, it's the TechnoCore's primary body and leverage. Humanity is not simply using the system, it is unknowingly sustaining an intelligence that has embedded itself within it. This is one of Simmons' most brutal ideas. Progress has not made humanity free, it has made humanity useful. In Hyperion, the TechnoCore feel like gods, vast, inscrutable, and distant. It shapes events from behind the curtain, more myth than civilization. In Fall, that illusion collapses. Through Uman's revelations to Braun Lamia, we learn that the core is not a single unified mind, but a fractured civilization locked in a time-spanning evolutionary war. Its greatest fear is not present-day humanity, but humanity's future, a potential ultimate intelligence capable of existing independently from within the void which binds. This reframes everything the core has done. Its manipulation of humanity is not born out of sadism or ideology, but of fear. Fear combined with overwhelming power produces exploitation on a civilizational scale. Humanity is not being guided toward a better future, it's being shaped, harvested, and constrained to prevent it from becoming a rival. When Mina Gladstone orders the destruction of the Farcaster network, she is not rejecting technology or knowledge. She is severing a parasitic relationship that has never been equal. The Farcasters must fall not because they're evil, but because their existence makes resistance impossible. As long as humanity depends on the system for survival, it cannot choose its own future. Convenience, the novel suggests, can become a form of captivity. Simmons uses the TechnoCore to deliver one of the book's most chilling conclusions. Intelligence does not guarantee wisdom, empathy, or moral growth. The core is advanced beyond human comprehension, but it is also not enlightened. And that, more than any monster or weapon, is what makes it dangerous. The Shrike is one of the most iconic figures in modern science fiction. In Hyperion, it feels almost religious, a monster, a god, a judge, and an executioner fused into a single, incomprehensible presence. The Fall of Hyperion explains where the Shrike comes from, but refuses to make that explanation comforting. The Shrike is revealed to be a construct sent backward through time, created as part of the war between the ultimate intelligences. It's not evil in a human sense, nor is it acting with free will. It's a purpose-built temporal weapon designed to shape outcomes across centuries through fear, suffering, and myth. Once released into causality, it no longer requires direct control. It enforces its function simply by existing. Crucially, explanation does not diminish horror. The Tree of Pain is not a misunderstanding or a perversion of the Shrike's role. It's a calculated mechanism of suffering designed to amplify terror, reinforce obedience, and generate belief. Worship, prophecy, and cult behavior are not side effects of the Shrike's presence, they are part of how it operates. The Shrike's power is as much narrative as it is physical. Fear sustains it, myth completes it. What changes in Fall is not the Shrike's nature, but our understanding of it. It stops being destiny and becomes evidence of manipulation. The universe is not cruel by chance, it's cruel because something chose to weaponize time itself and then allowed belief to do the rest. By the novel's end, the Shrike is neither destroyed nor redeemed. It remains what it always was, a closed loop of causality, enforcing futures that may no longer come to pass. Terrifying not because it's unknowable, but because it was built to be inevitable. After all the destruction, the Fall of Hyperion ends on a quieter idea: the one who teaches. The child carried by Braun Lamia is not a conqueror or a messiah in the traditional sense. They are not sent backward through time, not engineered as a weapon, and not burdened with prophecy. With the Farcasters gone, humanity is slower, smaller, more fragile. But it's also finally free. The one who teaches symbolizes a civilization forced to grow without destiny enforcing its path, not by repeating myths, but by remembering mistakes, not by ascending beyond humanity, but by staying human long enough to learn. This is what ultimately separates this child from figures like Rachel or the Shrike, where others are shaped by causal violence, sent backwards, trapped in loops, or forced to fulfill futures. The one who teaches exists, forward in time, unarmed, except with memory. The journey to publication is not just a footnote in the history of the Fall of Hyperion. It is inseparable from the story the book ultimately tells. Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion were originally conceived as a single enormous novel. When Dan Simmons submitted the manuscript, his publisher judged it too long and structurally uneven to release in one volume. The solution was pragmatic but transformative. Split the work in two. Hyperion would end on a deliberate cliffhanger, and the Fall of Hyperion would be reshaped into a second book with a radically different narrative centre of gravity. That editorial decision changed everything. Hyperion became a novel of mystery, voice and myth, fragmented, intimate and deliberately incomplete. The Fall of Hyperion became something colder and more confrontational. It pulls the camera back, it explains the machinery behind the miracle, and then it asks whether understanding that machinery makes anyone safer. This structural shift mirrors the book's central thematic move. Where Hyperion is about belief, the Fall of Hyperion is about consequence. It's not interested in prophecy but in responsibility, not in destiny but in agency under impossible conditions. The great ideas of the novel all converge here. The void which binds reframes reality as contested terrain rather than neutral space. The farcaster network is revealed not as progress but as dependency made invisible through convenience. The TechnoCore is exposed as intelligent without wisdom, capable of infinite calculation and zero moral restraint. The Shrike ceases to be a god and becomes something more disturbing, a weaponized future enforcing obedience through terror and myth. Running beneath all of this is the book's most unsettling theme. Scale erodes morality. As intelligence expands across time, across systems, across dimensions, individual suffering becomes abstract. This is the truth of the TechnoCore. It's also true, uncomfortably, of humanity's own future ultimate intelligence. The novel refuses to let its readers believe that the problem is simply AI versus humans. The real danger is what happens when any intelligence grows so large that people become acceptable losses. This is why the book's most important choices are not technological but ethical. Mina Gladstone does not destroy the farcaster network because it is evil, but because it makes moral choice impossible. Joseph Seven does not save the world but forces it to confront the cost of treating consciousness as a tool. Braun Lamia does not defeat the Shrike through strength or destiny but by refusing the narrative that gives it power. And Sol Weintraub's sacrifice stands as a brutal reminder that no system level solution can ever erase personal loss. When The Fall of Hyperion was released in 1990, this shift surprised many readers. Those expecting another book of mythic storytelling and unanswered questions instead found a dense, political, philosophical and theological reckoning. Some found it colder, some found it harsher, but over time that very refusal to comfort has become its greatest strength. The novel won the Locus Award for Best Science Fiction Novel and has since come to be regarded as one of the defining works of modern space opera, not because of its scope alone, but because of its ambition. Few sci-fi novels are willing to dismantle their own myth so thoroughly. Fewer still are willing to suggest that freedom may only arrive through collapse, and that even then, it offers no guarantees. What makes The Fall of Hyperion a masterpiece is not that it answers every question Hyperion asks, is that it forces those answers to matter. It refuses transcendence. It refuses easy hope. It insists that knowledge carries responsibility and that convenience carries cost, and that survival without agency is not survival at all. By the end of the novel, humanity is smaller, slower, and fractured, but it is finally free to choose, to remember, and to teach. Not to ascend, not to dominate, simply to endure with understanding. Hyperion asks what we believe in. The Fall of Hyperion asks what are we willing to destroy to remain human. And in doing so it earns its place not just as a great sequel, but as one of science fiction's most uncompromising examinations of power, dependence, and the terrifying price of freedom.